Hey everybody, this is Todd with Empire Music and EmpireMusicOnline.com. For today's Nuts and Bolts segment, I wanted to talk a little bit about the different types of tuning machines, the advantages of them. I can't really say pros and cons because there's not really any cons, but there are differences definitely. With having a lot of guitars in our inventory, there are a lot of different hardware options. So I just wanted to go quickly through some of the different tuners that are offered. For these examples, I'm using Fender, since we have a lot of Fender guitars here with all different types of hardware. Real quickly, for those who don't understand the concept of the tuner, obviously that's what the string comes from the bridge to the headstock, and obviously the tuner is what adds the tension to the string and also allows you to tune the guitar. There are different tuners. Not every tuner is the same. So you have different gear ratios, and if you're not familiar with the gear ratio, you may have heard the term 14-1, 15-1, 18-1, and so forth. What that means is that for instance, 18-1, you have to turn the knob 18 times for one revolution. So obviously the higher the first number, the smoother the tuner. The lower, obviously the harder it is to tune. So nowadays you're not really seeing anything below a 14-1, but if you buy a guitar that's older, more vintage, 70s, 80s, maybe even 90s, you may find something like an 8-1 or 10-1 still being used. Well, that's actually what was used back then. So I grabbed 4 examples. So the first tuner I wanted to show is the vintage style tuner, which is on this Eric Johnson model. The vintage tuners are going to give you the lowest gear ratio available today. So in this case, you're looking at a 14-1 gear ratio, and you're going to find these tuners on, well, this is an artist model, which he wanted it to be more of a vintage style tuner. You are going to find these on classic series models, stuff that's period specific, mainly 50s, 60s, 70s, right? So the advantage, it has, if you like that vintage look, it definitely has it. The kind of the bean shaped machine, the post, and the casing, right? So, but you're going for look, but you're settling for a lower gear. So, is it going to keep the guitar in tune? Yes, but it's 14 times around for one revolution. So it's still going to be lower than something like an 18-1 and so forth. But that's the vintage tuner. You're going to find that mainly on vintage inspired guitars or artist models in this case. But then you get something like this, which is on the American Performer, which is something they released the end of last year. The nice thing about this is it's a little bit deceiving. It has that vintage look, but inside it's actually a higher gearing ratio. So now we're dealing with 18-1 instead of 14-1. So now this is a smoother, more accurate tuner, but in a vintage casing. So this was a great idea that Fender used on their American Performer. So again, it gives you that look, but you're still getting that modern tuning ability. If you're not into the vintage look, then you get into a player model and a lot of other Fender models. This is kind of their go-to standard die-cast tuner. This one now is going to be the same as the American Performer. We're still at the 18-1, but now you have the more modern look. So again, you're going to have that smoother, more accurate tuning. So again, this is kind of the default tuner you'll find with Fender. And lastly, you have the locking tuner. So the advantage of the locking tuner is if you like to use your tremolo pretty aggressively, a la, say, David Gilmour, what can happen is with a standard tuner, you have windings. So you're getting extra tension, or I guess you call it slack. What can happen is as you start to bend the bridge or do your tremolo, it can actually pull the string kind of out of the tuner, especially if you have a lot of windings around there. So what the locking tuner does is you can see it has the locking mechanism on the back, but then instead of putting windings, you just bring the string through once. There's a pin that pushes the string against the tuning peg, and that's it. It's very similar to a Floyd Rose, the concept where you have the locking nut, where it's just bridge, and then it there's no extra slack, so you're never going to have that pulling effect that could take the guitar to tune. So that's the most useful function of a locking tuner, is to help out with the bridge, especially if you want to use it more often. Not to say that this isn't going to work, but again, that could arise because of the wrappings. Another thing I like about locking tuners is that if you're a performer and you break a string, it's the easiest thing to restring, because you don't even need a winder. You're going through once, a quarter turn, and it's in tune. Whereas this, typically you want 2 to 3 windings, so it does take longer to restring a standard tuning machine than a locking. So lockings are much easier for faster string changes. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. So I hope that helped. If you have any other questions, I'm always here. My name's Todd. But again, this is something we get asked a lot about, but maybe I was able to clarify some things. But yeah, I look forward to the next video. Thanks again. This is Todd with Empire Music and EmpireMusicOnline.com.